good morning, and welcome. If you are joining me for the very first time, my name is Dahlia, and I have been sharing from the book of John. Yes, yes, yes. So, if you are joining me for the very first time and you have not yet subscribed to my channel, I invite you to please subscribe to my channel and remember to like the video and to share it to invite others to come along and read through this wonderful book of John with us. We're teaching just the Word of God on this channel. And the book of John, what we're doing is an overview. We're doing an overview of the book of John. And especially to like any new believers who want to, learn the Bible, let's do an overview, a read through first, and then we can move on. And then you can go back and study it out and run all the references and put it together. But in this overview, what I'm trying to do is to stay in the content and the context of the book. I will throw in a few historical and cultural and, different things. And wherever we can pull out application and responsibility, I will do that as well. So again, roll up your sleeve and let's get through this overbook because John is a great, great book to read, especially as a new believer and as a seasoned believer. So in the last lesson, we talked about the Samaritan woman and Jesus going through Samaria. We said it wasn't happenstance, it wasn't a frivolous reroute, but Jesus made a purposeful journey through Samaria. He gets there and he meets this woman at the well. And so he began to converse and engage with her. And we can see a little feistiness in this woman because Jesus had a purpose. Because this woman, sometimes we think that things, just happen to us. But when God has his hand on you, nothing can stop it. It doesn't matter how deep in sin you are. It doesn't matter your race. It doesn't matter your creed, it doesn't matter anything. When God has his hand on you, no one can stop it. And like we said, Jesus went through Samaria, and the Samaritans and the Jews did not get along. They didn't like each other. They hated each other. So for a Jew to be talking to this woman, number one, she was a woman, let alone a Samaritan, it was unheard of. It was like, that taboo, like, what are you doing? And so her reaction was normal because she was like, you, a Jew, talking to me, a Samaritan woman. So she knew what the stigma was with both groups, with their group and with the Jews. So her response was quite normal. But Jesus had a purpose and a plan for her life, just like he has a plan and a purpose for our life. And so sometimes we think that, oh, when God comes into our lives or Christ come into our life, it was just a frivolous, wind that blew him our way. No, he chose you and you responded yes. So let's get into it and continue this wonderful story about this great woman that Jesus saw fit to reroute his trip purposefully to speak with her. That's how special we are, that Jesus, he will come, he will visit us. You can never be too dark, too far gone in anything. Jesus still loves you. That's why in John 3:16 it says, "For God so loved the world, he loves us, and he did not come to condemn, but that through him the world might be saved, those who would believe." All right. So we stopped off at about verse 9, and we're going to continue. So I'll read a little bit for you, and then we'll continue on. So the last time we left off where she said to Jesus, the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. And so Jesus is now going to respond to her. So we're going to start in verse 10. And it says here, Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given to you living water." Then the woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well, and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock? And Jesus answered and said unto her, Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst again. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water, that I may not thirst, nor come here to draw. So I'm going to stop there at verse 15 because there's a few things to unpack. But as we can see from this verses, he's now responding to her, because in the last lesson we left off where Jesus was just breaking down these barriers. There were barriers and Jesus was breaking down the barriers, because remember, the Samaritans were like aliens. The Jews didn't consider them to be anything. And they never walked there. They would not go through Samaria. They would take the longer route to go. If they're going, Jesus was going to Galilee. And had he not gone through Samaria, he would have taken a longer route to get there. And that's what the Jews would do. They would take the longer route. So here he poses what he does now when he answers her, because she asked him some questions. She was like, how is it, in verse 10, how is it that you, a Jew, a rabbi, asking me to drink, a woman, a Samaritan woman? And so he answered her. And so his answer was very specific. And one of the things you're going to learn about Jesus is that Jesus, he engages into conversation with people, and especially with this woman. And when Jesus engages in conversation, if you read throughout the synoptic gospels and even in John, what he does is he pricks their curiosity. He hones into in deep inside of them to pull out. He pulls out of us what's inside of us. Because many times we don't know what's really inside of us, in that spirit man. And so sometimes when Jesus, if you ever read through the synoptic gospel, he would always speak to them in parables. But when he speaks in parables, what he does, he will use something that is familiar to them to speak, and then to identify and to equate it with spiritual things so that they would understand. So when the revelation knowledge comes, they would get it. And so here he meets her at the well. And I'm going to say that it was purposeful, because again, he's using the water to express to her spiritual things and the gift of God. And so he's using the water. So she can then, by the time the revelation gets into her spirit, she'll get the spiritual part. But in the conversation, she didn't grasp yet fully the spiritual that he was trying to equate to her so that she gets a revelation. So Jesus often used parables. He uses stories and allegories and things that we can identify with so we can understand spiritual things. And so he pricked her curiosity with the natural, but then he then puts the spiritual right there. Now, he says this to her. So let's look at what he says. He answered and said, if you knew the gift of God and who. So one, if you knew the gift of God, that's number one. And then he says, and if you knew who says to you this thing, you would then, in other words, if you knew who was asking you to give him to drink, you would turn around and ask him to give you the living water. And she said, but you don't have anything to draw the water with. And she said, the well is deep. And she says, where are you getting this living water from? Are you greater than Jacob, our father, who gave us the well? And he drank there. So she's then asking him all these questions. So you see, this woman, again, remember, women were like second class citizens. They weren't supposed to engage in conversation with a male. But this woman, she knew her history, and she knew the situation and the history and the culture between the Jews and the Samaritans. And she said, listen, Jacob our father, because remember, they are half breed. So she refers to Jacob as her father. And she said, Jacob our father gave us this well. He himself drank from it, and his sons, and his livestock. And Jesus said, whoever drinks this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks the water that I shall give him will never thirst again. And the water that I shall give him will become a fountain of what? Water springing up into him everlasting life. You see that? So when she asked him all these questions, and again, this was a very riveting conversation because Jesus is pulling out of her. He's pulling out of her, yet he's pouring into her because Jesus was revealing himself to her. We have to go back to John 3:16. And again, remember I said I'm staying in the content and context of the book when he said, if you knew the gift of God, well, the gift of God was his son. Remember John 3:16 when he says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. And so Jesus says, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that says to you, give me to drink, you would ask him to give you to drink. And then he goes on and he explains and he says, whoever drinks this water, meaning the water from the well, will thirst again. But the water which I give, you will never thirst again. And she said, give me this water that I may drink so that I may not come back and draw from the well. Now, historically speaking, if you look, and again, I don't want you to go there, and I'm not sending you there, but a little background on this water issue, because again, he's using the water as an example to again reveal himself to her. And when he said, when I will give you this living water. And in the history and in the ancient days, they would call spring water living water. Because notice she says to Jesus, give me this water that I may not thirst again, nor come here to draw. So she's still thinking in the natural. And so in the ancient days, they would look at living water as spring water because the spring water would bubble up from the ground. It would come up from the ground without the help of man or any man-made well. It would come up out of the ground instead of a cistern or a well. So in the ancient days, or historically, they would look at spring water as living water because she's saying, give me this water that I may not thirst again and that I may not come back to this well to draw out the water. So you would find that in Jeremiah 2:13, 17, and 13. You will find these references to spring water. So again, Jesus was revealing himself to her. And he says, whoever drinks of this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst again. For the water that I will give him will what? Become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life. And he was referring to himself because if you remember, again, we're staying in the content of John when he said in John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth on him should not perish, but what? Perish, but have everlasting life. And he's saying that if you drink this water that I'm giving you, it will be a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life. Remember, he didn't die yet. So when he's revealing himself, because remember, the gift of God, he says, for God so loved the world that he gave. He is the gift of God. He is the Son of God. And so she's an outsider, kind of like an outcast. even though they were half breed. They were like outcast. And so he was revealing himself. But again, when Jesus comes and he reveals himself, he does it in a way that they will grasp and understand, and they can identify and understand what he's talking about. Because the Samaritans, they were looking for a Messiah as well. Remember, they are children of Jacob. They were just half breed, even though they were outcast by the Jews, the law, the ones who follow the law of Moses, the stricter Jews. So they too was looking for a savior to come. And so Jesus, this conversation was a conversation with purpose. And so we see that Jesus says to her, if you get this water, you will never thirst again. And look at her response. You can see and get into the hearts of people. And that's what Jesus does. He's Lord, he's God. And he knows the intent of the heart. And he pricked her heart. And she said, Sir, give me this water that I may not thirst again. So he's reaching deep into her soul. And even though she's still in the natural, she was drawn to him. She was drawn into what he was saying, and she wanted the water, even though she didn't quite get the revelation of who he was. Because remember, in the previous verse 10, he says, if you knew who it is who says, give me to drink, and if you knew the gift of God, you would ask for this living water, and he would give it to you. So he kind of like, my professor once used to say to us, sometimes it's best to answer a question with a question. Because when you listen to the question, you will realize that the answer is sometimes in the question. The answer is hidden in the question. So if you understand the question, then it will point you to the answer. So you always have to make sure you understand the question to see where that question is taking you or where it's pushing you. And Jesus was very good at that. So he was drawing out of her that hidden faith, that thirst, that longing. Because believe it or not, mankind is thirsty. And he's not talking about thirst in the natural, but he uses thirst in the natural to talk about the thirst in the spiritual, because it's a contrast. And mankind, even today, is thirsty. And they try to fill it with fame. They try to fill it with fortune. They try to fill it with money. They try to fill it with sex and power. But it's not satisfying, because there is a thirst in your soul. There is a thirst in my soul, and that thirst is for God. There is a place in us where the Spirit of God hovers, and that's the place where that longing comes from. But many people, they seek to quench it with other things, and it doesn't quench it, you see. So Jesus was going in, he was tapping in to that natural thirst, but he uses the natural thirst to get into the spiritual thirst in her soul. Because when you see the continuation of this conversation, Jesus then says something to her, and then you're going to see the life she was living, because she was trying to quench a particular thirst in her life. She was trying to quench a particular emptiness and longing in her life, but she was doing it the wrong way and with the wrong people. So he came to quench that thirst. And many times we see people and we judge them, and we judge their lifestyle. But you see, they're trying to quench that emptiness, that void, that thirst. And Jesus is trying to say to her, that thirst you've been experiencing, what you're doing cannot satisfy it. Here it is. If you knew the gift of God, and if you knew who it is that says to you, give me to drink, you would then ask him to give you to drink. And this water that I'm going to give you will stay in you, spring springing up like a fountain, and it will give you everlasting life. And you will never thirst again. You see, when God comes into our life and Jesus comes into our life, we will never thirst again. We won't have that longing. We won't look to things and people and money and power and sex to satisfy the longing in our heart, the longing in our spirit, because God will fill that. Because the Bible says, greater is He that's in us than he that's in the world. So when He says thirsty, He uses it as a contrast because she had a spiritual thirst inside of her. And you're going to see as we go through the story, when He says something else to her, you're going to see because she is thirsty, not in the natural, but in the spirit. And so Jesus came to fill that emptiness within this woman. Beautiful. She said, Sir, give me this water that I may not thirst again, or come here to draw water. And if many of us would ask Jesus Christ into our hearts, we would never thirst again for the foolishness that we seek after in the world, for the material things we run after into the world. We will see that Jesus, the Spirit of God, will come in and satisfy us, and we will be fulfilled, because Jesus is what? The fullness of God. And He will come and abode within our soul, within our hearts, within our spirit. Oh, I have to stop here. So come back. We're going to continue, because this conversation is not over. He talks about the thirst. Remember, He always uses something in the natural, and contrasts with the spiritual to pull out of us what's already inside. This woman was thirsty on the inside spiritually, but she did not know. She didn't know. And so Jesus came, and so He pricked her and engaged her in a conversation, pulling out of her, and then He was going to fill her. Oh, it's a beautiful story. Come back. We're not done yet. Thank you for watching. Remember, subscribe to the channel, send it to your friends, invite them to come and read through the book of John as we do this overview of the book of John. It's exciting, and you learn a lot, and you'll get to, see what's going on and learn about the ministry of Jesus Christ and what He came to do and the reason why. So remember, He didn't come to condemn the world, but through Him the world might be saved and get everlasting life. Jesus came to give everlasting life, and that's what He came to give to this woman. Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you so much for watching. Go with God and continue to be a blessing, because you are blessed to be a blessing. Thank you for watching.